In October 2024, engineers at chip-making research firm Tech Insights cracked open Huawei's most advanced AI processor and found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Silicon fabricated by TSMC, routed through a proxy company tied to a Chinese crypto billionaire. That single teardown is the loose thread on one of the stranger corporate stories of the last decade, because the official narrative since 2019 has been simple. The United States, through what's called the Entity List, the trade blacklist administered by the Bureau of Industry and Security, effectively cut Huawei off from Google, from TSMC, from US technology of all kinds. And yet 6 years later, Huawei has just reported revenue of around 880 billion yuan for 2025. That is its second highest year on record. It just reclaimed the #1 spot in Chinese smartphones. Harmony OS is now the third largest mobile operating system on the planet. Its share of the global telecom equipment market is higher today than it was before the sanctions started. And it sells an AI rack scale system that on paper beats Nvidia's flagship. Once you pull it apart, there are roughly 4 structural forces holding this story up, and each one has a crack running right through it. The biggest of those cracks opens in a Brooklyn courtroom 1 week from now. Start with the foundation. The Wall Street Journal documented somewhere around $75 billion in state support flowing to Huawei over its lifetime. The biggest chunk, about $46 billion, came as loans and credit lines from state banks. Another $25 billion came through tax savings. The rest was a mix of discounted land, direct grants, and customer financing through China's policy banks. According to the WSJ, that scaffolding allowed Huawei to undercut rivals' prices by some 30%. Its grants alone were reportedly 17 times larger than Nokia's, and Ericsson received 0 state subsidies in the same period. But the headline number is misleading on its own. Huawei isn't really selling base stations and routers, it's selling below market financing. A typical Ericsson 5G station runs somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000 a piece, and Huawei's equivalent prices about 30% below. On a 50,000 station rural build-out for an emerging market carrier that saves the customer hundreds of millions of dollars on hardware alone, stack on a low interest loan from China Development Bank at rates roughly half China's commercial benchmark, and you're saving another few hundred million in interest over a decade. That is the product. Nobody in the West has anything like it. The post-2019 funding only deepened it. The German think tank, MERICS, estimates that Huawei has received around $30 billion in additional state funding from Shenzhen and the central government since 2021, money explicitly earmarked for building a parallel chip supply chain. Add China's 344 billion yuan Big Fund 3, launched in 2024, and you have a state corporate engine that nothing in the Western technology world remotely resembles. Huawei strongly contests the WSJ's framing, calling its R&D subsidies less than 0.3% of revenues. The crack here is something different anyway. In May 2025, the Bureau of Industry and Security ruled that using Huawei's Ascend AI chips anywhere in the world violates US export controls. In effect, the AI business is now trapped inside China by US law. That money built something specific, a shadow semiconductor manufacturing network. According to Bloomberg reporting, Huawei has been quietly building or controlling roughly 11 semiconductor fabs across China, with 5 of them capable of sub-7 nanometer production. Companies with names like SiCarrier, Shuaishuo, PXW, PST, officially, none of them are Huawei subsidiaries, but according to industry insiders cited by the Financial Times and Korean trade press, all of these companies are recognized as being under Huawei. But the manufacturing wasn't ready, not for the AI chips. So Huawei did something else, and this is where that October 2024 teardown comes back. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Huawei used shell companies to trick the Taiwanese chip foundry TSMC into manufacturing an astonishing total of 2 million computer chiplets for its Ascend 910 AI processors. The vehicle was Xiamen Softgo, a chip design firm partly owned by the co-founder of Bitcoin mining giant Bitmain. Softgo placed orders for chips that just happened to match Huawei's designs. Semi-analysis estimates roughly $500 million of 7 nanometer wafers moved through this single channel. The US Commerce Department is currently negotiating a fine against TSMC of around $1 billion, which Semi-Analysis dryly noted is only 2x what they profited. So when Chinese state media celebrated the 2023 Mate 60 Pro as proof of semiconductor self-sufficiency, a smartphone built on a domestic 7nm process without EUV lithography, the smartphone part was real. SMIC genuinely fabricated the Kirin chip at home, and Tech Insights confirmed it. But the AI accelerator part was a sleight of hand. Most of the silicon inside the high-end Ascend chips was Taiwanese, laundered through a crypto mining startup. The domestic chip miracle had a foreign manufacturer hiding inside it. The third pillar holding the comeback story up isn't about chips, it's about how the financials are being read. When Huawei released its 2024 results, almost every English language headline framed it the same way. Revenue surged 22%, but net profit fell 28%. That sounds like a company growing while bleeding margin. The actual driver was different. In 2023, Huawei booked roughly 63 billion yuan in other net income. That category included the gain from selling its Honor smartphone brand to a Shenzhen government-controlled buyer. Reuters reported the price as around $15 billion, although neither side has ever officially confirmed it. In 2024, that line dropped to about 8 billion yuan. The profit crash was the Honor disposal gain rolling off the books. Operating cash flow actually rose by nearly 27% that year. That's the optimistic reading. The pessimistic one arrived in the first half of 2025, when net profit fell 32% year-on-year. For real, no Honor effect this time, even as revenue inched up around 4%. Research and development now eats nearly 23% of revenue. You cannot run a parallel chip supply chain, a parallel operating system, and a parallel AI compute platform on the cheap. Rotating chairwoman Sabrina Meng said, "Performance was in line with forecast." That's one way to describe it. The fourth pillar is the most underappreciated one. CloudMatrix 384, the AI rack scale system, Huawei launched in April 2025, technically beats Nvidia's flagship. It delivers around 300 petaflops of BF16 compute against Nvidia's roughly 180. It has more than 3 times the memory, and semi-analysis founder Dylan Patel put it bluntly. China and Huawei now have AI system capabilities that can beat Nvidia's. There's a catch, the spec sheet doesn't show. The Huawei system consumes about 559 kilowatts of power, while the Nvidia rack consumes about 145. On performance per watt, the Chinese system is roughly 2.5 times worse. In a Texas data center paying retail US electricity prices, that is uneconomic in Inner Mongolia, where industrial electricity has fallen by close to 40% over 3 years, it works fine. The Chinese AI breakthrough is partly a Chinese energy policy story. According to a Council on Foreign Relations report, Huawei's strategy is explicit: produce inferior chips in large enough numbers to compete with Nvidia in aggregate. CFR estimates Huawei's total AI compute will remain at around 2% of Nvidia's through the back half of the decade. The biggest crack of all opens on May the 4th, 2026, 1 week from when this video is being made, in a Brooklyn federal courtroom where Judge Ann Donnelly is scheduled to preside over the largest criminal racketeering trial ever brought against a Chinese company. 16 counts: RICO conspiracy, bank fraud, conspiracy to steal trade secrets, sanctions violations involving Iran and North Korea referred to in internal Huawei communications, according to the Department of Justice by the code names A2 and A9. The DOJ case rests in part on one particularly damaging piece of paper: a July 2013 internal Huawei document formalizing a bonus program for employees who obtained confidential information from competitors. Huawei has called the case a prosecutorial target in search of a crime. Judge Donnelly disagreed, rejecting the company's motion to dismiss 13 of the 16 counts last July. Whether the trial actually proceeds in any meaningful sense is genuinely uncertain. Huawei has no US presence to compel attendance, and previous proceedings have been delayed twice. But a guilty verdict could trigger forfeiture proceedings against Huawei's American assets, set US legal precedent for Chinese corporate intellectual property theft, and hand the Bureau of Industry and Security judicially affirmed grounds for further export control. 3 things follow from all of this. The first is that the next decade of US-China economic competition runs through a corporate structure that doesn't exist anywhere else. Huawei is privately held, employee-owned on paper. Founder Ren Jingfei holds around 1.14% by Huawei's own most recent disclosure, and yet receives state support on a scale no Western company has ever seen. Whether the company is genuinely private or effectively state-owned is contested even among academics, with peer-reviewed work on both sides. Western legal categories don't fit, and any export control regime that assumes they do is going to keep producing surprises. The second is that the rip and replace bill from the West's earlier embrace of Huawei is real and ongoing. UK industry estimates put the cost of removing Huawei from British networks at around £2 billion. The US Federal Communications Commission's reimbursement program ended up costing American taxpayers about $5.6 billion to swap out around 24,000 pieces of Huawei and ZTE equipment. That's roughly a quarter of Huawei's entire annual telecom equipment revenue, and it was paid by Western ratepayers and taxpayers. Meanwhile, the supposed beneficiaries Nokia and Ericsson have been losing global market share, not gaining it. And the third is that the Huawei comeback headline is doing an enormous amount of work, covering up a far more complicated story. Sanctions made the company more vertically integrated than it has ever been, but they also boxed it into a corner where it can't legally export its most advanced products, can't easily serve power-sensitive markets outside China, and is now walking into a federal racketeering trial whose worst-case outcome takes years to fully play out. Whether that trial proceeds as scheduled is one of the genuinely open questions in global trade right now. The answer will tell you a great deal about what the rest of the 2020s look like for chips, for telecom, and for any company still relying on the assumption that Western technology choke points work the way they used to. This is general information only, not personal financial advice. Please consider speaking with a licensed financial advisor in your jurisdiction before making any decisions.